I'm Jeff Lancaster. I lead agency partnerships for LinkedIn Marketing Solutions here in Canada. Excited to be here with you today to talk about B2B trends. So what we've got for you today is our 2022 trends, compilation of some interesting marketing ideas from LinkedIn and our marketing effectiveness team at the B2B Institute. So, these are some, little known best practices we feel can give you a significant edge over the competition. But first, let's preface some of these marketing ideas we'll discuss here today. Ideas can be right, they can be wrong. I think you can be contrarian, you can be consensus, so with the crowd or against the crowd. I think we can all agree there's never any advantage of being wrong in life. We've learned that from a very early age. Being right and being consensus is where most people in marketing tend to play, and we think often get it wrong. If you're doing the same thing as everyone else, then competition competes away profits and ends up being, usually not a great long-term strategy. Contrarian and right, will give you a more competitive, durable advantage that will help you make more money. So, marketers are often asking, what is everybody else doing? We think a better question is, what is nobody doing? And that's the way we're going to frame up our conversation here today with our trends. Let's jump in with our first trend, central casting. So this is kind of a fun and entertaining sort of provocation to get started with. Try describing Star Wars without the characters. You really couldn't do it. Probably would be pretty boring, let's be honest. What would you call it? Is it like the lightsabers versus the ships or the Death Star? Not only is that, sound like kind of a boring story, you'd probably never watch that movie, and it certainly wouldn't have been as successful as it was. It's not the products that got the Academy Awards and made Star Wars so popular. It's not the products that make the story so interesting that it persists today. New versions continue to be spawned out year over year. It's the characters. It's not the products that make Star Wars, it's the characters. Han Solo, Darth Vader, Baby Yoda. Need I say more? Baby Yoda. And interestingly, the same can be said for B2B advertising. We work with actually a partner called System 1, and they study creative effectiveness in characters in advertising. And they find that adding a character to your advertising that represents your brand essentially doubles your brand recall. Something that they actually call brand fluency. This is a simple way to actually double your recall, double your marketing effectiveness. Yet the same data actually shows us that only about 5% of ads in the sample that they looked at actually even featured characters. The numbers are even more dismal in B2B, where I know we're challenged certainly in terms of creative. Traditionally, less than 1% of ads in the B2B space featured a character. Characters are extremely effective in advertising, but really nobody's using them. So really think marketers, this is an enormous opportunity for you. There's a lot of evidence on this topic. Much of it comes from Ehrenberg Bass, who is another key partner in a lot of our research here at LinkedIn. They have a concept called ownership. So how many people know of an asset, and then how many people, can uniquely link that asset to just your brand and not to your competitor? Part of the reason why characters are so incredibly effective is that they're not easily confused. Characters are a very ownable asset. The best characters are very distinctive, which makes them, most correctly identified. So as we can see in the data that you'll see here, color can often be confused with competitors. You take the color red, it can be associated with a whole lot of brands, whereas characters, are rarely confused with competitors. Characters suffer the least from competition, which makes them some of the most ownable, some of the most worthy of long-term investment. So characters can take on many forms, whether it's in B2B or in B2C. One of our favorites is animation. So somebody like Salesforce's Astro. We love Astro or other trailblazer characters that they use within their stable. Animated characters are entirely ownable and unique to your brand. But the fundamental idea here is this. It's, if you want your brand to be remembered, Think about casting your brand character front and center. Let's talk about our next trend, which is called the 95-5 rule. And let's start out with an interesting fable, from marketing legends of lore. How soon does most advertising drive sales? Well, legend has it, and in reality, it's true. Advertising can drive sales for long periods of time, sometimes up to 40 or 50 years. So, interesting story. Two ad men, got into a car. One says to the other, I saw an ad for this Aston Martin and bought this car. And the second fellow says, well, Aston Martin hasn't been advertising for years. What are you talking about? Well, the first ad executive says, well, I saw the ad when I was 5 years old, when I was young, and it stuck with me. And when I was older and I had more money, I was able to go ahead and purchase that vehicle. So the point here is advertising isn't something that just works in the short term. It actually works over the long term. Brand advertising in particular works over very long periods of time, sometimes up to 50 years, like in this example from Aston Martin. And this is because the best ads drive sales over long periods of time. The best ads don't necessarily wear out. And I think a lot of brands actually get this wrong. They can actually wear in over long periods of time. They build memories that still have the power to influence us years later. And this is especially important given that 95% of your potential buyers, they aren't necessarily ready to buy today. They're out market today, but maybe in market for your product sometime in the future. And this isn't just a theory. There's a lot of data to back this up, both in B2B and B2C. Take computers. 75% of companies buy computers every 4 years. Take something like financial services. 80% of companies change banking services like every 5 years. Or even in a B2C case, 90% of consumers might buy a new car like every 10 years, or even in the case of a luxury vehicle like Aston Martin, maybe once in a lifetime. And you can find other sources of data that back this up. So the point here is ads don't necessarily work by moving people through the traditional marketing funnel as you sort of think about it today. Ads work by reaching people who aren't even in the funnel yet. This is why top funnel, bottom funnel, we really think that's the wrong mental model to use when thinking about your marketing efforts. We really think the right mental model is think in market, out market. Most buyers are future buyers, and they're also future sources of cash flow. So when it comes to valuations of company, think about the stock markets. Companies are primarily valued on future cash flows. That's how investors sort of think about it. So priming those future buyers with your advertising is an absolute key. And so the problem with the marketing myth that we described earlier with Aston Martin is that it leads marketers to believe that they can move people in market, that's the job of advertising. In reality, ads don't put buyers in market. Buyers put themselves in market when they need that product or service that you're selling. So the job of advertising is not necessarily to nudge or nurture people through a funnel, or to persuade buyers actively evaluating their options. The job of advertising is to make people mentally aware who are out of market, so that when they do come in market, you are the first brand that they think of. And most of the time, the first brand thought of is the one that actually gets bought. And if they don't know you when they come in market, then it's already too late. Professor John Dawes from Ehrenberg Bass, who was actually the author of our 95-5 research paper, he makes the critical point here that if buyers don't know you when they enter the market, there's no way that they'll consider you. So your job as an advertiser is to make sure that you're building mental availability among people who are currently out market, so that when they move in market, your brand is the one that they're familiar with. So to grow your brand, we really think that you should follow the 95-5 rule. Commit to advertising to people who aren't in market now, so that when they do enter the market, your brand is the one that they're familiar with. The next trend we're going to dive into is situational awareness. So, memories are highly dependent on situations. There are fascinating studies that look at the relationship between situations and recall. And one such repeated experiment, actually a really famous experiment, has shown that if we learn vocabulary underwater, kind of strange to think of, I know, our recall is actually best when we're underwater again. So in other words, memories rarely exist independent of situations. Most conscious memory recall happens as a result of a situational trigger. Brand memories can actually be the same. We tend to remember some brands over others depending on the situation we find ourselves in or when we are in the market to purchase. Phil Barden actually had a great book called Decoded, where he actually broke this down. Certainly recommend that you seek it out, a great read. He ran an experiment asking participants in the UK which ice cream brand, came to mind. Which came to mind, one generally, versus which ice cream brand came to mind as a dessert at Christmas time. And what he found was that, one, the results varied quite dramatically. The brand that advertised at Christmas time, was much more top of mind in that situation, and trumped the ice cream brand that was the top one that came to mind, generally speaking. So that situation acted as a frame, and that frame can significantly affect, in this case, which ice cream brand came to mind in which situation. So situations can certainly determine what we buy. Situation is clearly a powerful determinant of the brands that we remember, but most marketers today don't measure situation, if at all. At best, marketers today are measuring brand awareness, and even that is generally sorely lacking in B2B circles. But it's not about whether buyers know your brand. What matters is whether buyers know or think of your brand when they enter a buying situation. This can be best explained by the share of mind funnel, which we'll actually see here. Most marketers are at the bottom of this funnel. They want to know if category buyers know their brand. So, if we're looking at the coffee category, awareness asks, how many coffee brands can I name in that category? The next step, salience. That's the next step. And so when primed to think of the coffee category, in this case, which brand comes to mind first? So this is the brand that is top of mind. Oftentimes it can be the largest competitor in the category. If we use the coffee category again as an example, the brand with the most salience is likely somebody like Starbucks, like the industry leader. But the real question marketers need to ask is which coffee brand comes to mind in different buying situations. So like when you're on your way to work versus what coffee I drink on the weekends versus when you're catching up with an old friend. These are entirely different situations, or what we term category entry points. They likely influence the brand that most readily comes to mind. So Starbucks may be top of mind, but I may be more readily thinking of something like Keurig in terms of coffee I make on the weekends, or someone like Tim Hortons in terms of grabbing a coffee with an old friend. So it's not about just being top of mind, it's about share of mind. The more category entry points your brand covers, the more share of mind you have in those situations, the more your brand will have the opportunity to grow. And so think of it this way. The brand that comes to mind is the brand that gets bought. So how do I actually build situational awareness? So what you need to do is actually think in terms of situations. It's not about what buyers think of your brand, it's about when they think of your brand. So understand your situational cues, and we've actually set up what we call a framework here called the W's framework. And we think this is an approach, that you can use. It's a series of questions that you can ask to determine the why, when, where, with whom of when your buyers or when people enter the market. And you can go through and you can use this framework to determine, how people and when they're sort of thinking about your product. Is there a certain time of year that people buy? That's the when. Where are people when they buy? Are they at home? Are they at work? Are they on the road? How do people feel, when they buy your product? Is this bought, as part of a buying committee, the with? Are you in the middle of a digital transformation? You can go through all of these different, questions and determine and get a better understanding of what are the category-specific buying situations, or again, category entry points, and they will allow you to develop creative that you can uniquely link your brand to those buying situations. There's no awareness independent of situations, which is why situational messaging is so critical. Identify your key category entry points and link your brand to them by developing brand advertising that leverages easy to understand messaging around these core buying situations. Easy to understand is the critical bit here. Out-market buyers will not respond well to super technical messaging. Don't make it too complicating. Messaging for your out-market buyer works for your in-market buying too, but not the reverse. So a best-in-class example of this is actually Salesforce's Trailblazer campaign. So you can see they've gone through this process of determining what their buying situations are. The 3 key buying situations that Salesforce wanted to own are bringing customers together. So you can see here, customers together with companies. Did you know that Salesforce also works with governments? So, they bring governments and citizens together. They also work in the manufacturing space, so bring manufacturers and customers together. So they crafted these easy to understand messages that did just that, linking those groups together. Salesforce used heavy branding and situational messaging to link their brand to their key buying situations. Our next trend is what we call the product delusion. So in B2B, marketing is seen as an afterthought at best oftentimes, let's admit it. Everything is generally centered around the product. And what we call the product delusion certainly reigns supreme with a lot of organizations. So, companies can compete exclusively on product superiority and to boost sales. All you need is a better product or more product. What better way to encapsulate this than by this Bezos quote? And he was obviously, famous for saying, "Advertising is the price you pay for having an unremarkable product or service," implying that product is all that matters. Interestingly, he's since come around to realize how wrong he really was, and Amazon's actually the biggest advertiser on the planet Earth today. But I digress. So, imagine this thought experiment for a moment. What if Coca-Cola marketed itself as sweet, brown, and fizzy? So strip away the iconic logo, no red and white, no distinctive bottle, no distinctive assets, no stories, just ads boasting the solution's success. So if Coca-Cola advertised like a B2B brand, it would probably be something like, bland gray cups on ads that tell us that 95% of thirsty people agree that Coca-Cola solves their thirst problem. 89% of Coca-Cola monthly buys are discounted. You see the problem here. This type of attribute-based advertising is pretty much all that we see in B2B. Imagine if B2C did that. Let's be honest, B2C would never do that. They realize that what makes you pay more for a product isn't the features, it's the brand. The reality is that marketers and people don't buy the best product, they buy the best product that they know. The best product isn't the one with the most sophisticated attributes, People don't enter a buying situation and start doing extensive research to find the absolute best product on the market. Almost every time, the best product is the product that you know, the one that you probably are already familiar with. Why is that? So there's actually an interesting concept called satisficing. A gentleman by the name of Herbert Simon actually won the Nobel Prize for his concept of satisficing. I will actually encourage you to go online and actually look it up. Most people are satisficers, especially in most purchase contexts. What they do is they satisfy with the option that suffices rather than the absolute optimal solution. So what we're talking about here is usually the option that's just good enough. So pursuing the perfect product, takes too much time and too much effort. In most cases, the brand that's most easily remembered is probably the brand that's actually going to get bought. So you don't necessarily need better products. What you need is more mental availability. So this is critical because most people, they actually don't evaluate, and people think that they evaluate more than they actually probably do. They generally will tend to buy what's actually mentally available. So even with high involvement purchases, things like B2B banking, little evaluation actually occurs in real life. Nearly half of buyers surveyed went straight to their current bank when they needed a new banking service. And among those who said that they evaluated other options, ultimately 75% of them still ended up staying with their current financial institution in this research. Regardless, buyers tend to evaluate less than 2 brands on average, and if any evaluation really does occur at all. So if a buyer doesn't know you when they enter the market, it's probably already too late, like we talked about earlier. The primary job isn't to build an absolute great product, it's to build a great product that everybody is aware of. Awareness is the fundamental thing that is hard to build in consumer minds. Anybody can build a product. It's about making people aware of your product. Because we don't buy the products that are best, we buy the products that are best that we know. So awareness is key here when it comes to the product delusion. Let's jump into our last trend. Our last trend is called performance branding. So performance marketers have made lead generation look like an absolute quantifiable science, but let's be honest, it's actually really not. But by making it look like one, they've influenced the industry, the marketing industry, in their favor and have gotten the lion's share of most B2B marketing budgets today. But the reality is, lead gen doesn't generate most sales. Memory gen does. Here's a great example that actually illustrates this actually quite succinctly. So take a look at this business insurance data from the UK, which actually shows a direct correlation between mental market share, or mental availability, against traditional market share. And what you'll see is far and away the brand that has the most mental market share also has the most actual market share at the same time. And this is true for most any category. And why is that? Well, because the brand that's remembered is the brand that gets bought. Purchases are not a function of lead gen, they're a function of memory gen. So a memory generation program is really all about brand marketing. So we think this is a great opportunity for marketers to maybe rethink and maybe reframe how they move forward. And so we've actually put together what we think is an interesting framework around, how you can do performance branding. And we call it RMB. So we recommend that you follow the RMB framework to stay remembered. And so the RMB being, R, reach the whole category. M, message around several category entry points, and brand everything. So RMB is the formula to successful brand marketing and is far more reliable, far more cost effective and scalable than performance marketing will ever be. And as we said before, no famous brands, like let's be honest, were ever built on lead generation. But many famous brands were built on brand marketing. So let's break these down a little bit more. So the first step to R&B is reach everybody in the category. And that's the key thing, reach everybody in your category. So, here at LinkedIn, we've actually got a great tool, our LinkedIn Campaign Manager tool, which actually makes this really easy to do. And we've illustrated this example with a case study for the finance category. So, in LinkedIn Campaign Manager, you can simply select a brand awareness objective and then target by company industry. So here, we've selected each type of finance company to ensure that we're targeting the entire finance category. And as you can see, this gives us the opportunity to reach 1.1 million relevant buyers in Canada. By targeting the category, you reap several important brand building benefits. So one, you reach both in-market and out-market buyers. Two, you reach buyers across all functions of the buying committee, senior or junior, and importantly, you reach buyers of all seniority levels, right? So ensuring that your brand building efforts, which are a long-term investment, that they reach not only senior employees, but also junior employees, because they're the ones that will actually be the decision makers of tomorrow. So you can reach everybody who's part of the buying committee. So reach everybody in the category. The next step in R&B is to message around category entry points, as we talked about earlier. First, you must understand what your key category entry points are, or what buying situations are key for your brand in your category. Once you know those category entry points, build messaging to link your brand to them. And then the final step in R&B is branding. So brand everything with distinctive assets. I see this every single day. This is something that a lot of brands don't get right, and it's so simple. And EY is a prime example of this, as you'll sort of see here. They've got powerful, distinctive B2B brand assets. Their rhombus, the yellow rhombus that you see, it's distinctive, it's ownable, it's easily attributed to the EY brand. They make sure that their logo is visible on all of their advertising. Again, this might seem intuitive, but many brands that we see today in B2B don't even feature the brand's logo prominently enough, or even sometimes at all. So a simple tip, make sure you brand everything. If you don't, you run the risk of building mental availability for your competitors, which we all certainly don't want to do. So brand marketers are already winning the game, but now they need to learn how to play it. So in our increasingly digital and data-driven world, advertisers have adopted hyper-targeting, click maximization, and other performance marketing strategies simply because they could, despite a lack of any evidence that they actually work. Performance marketers, they've mastered the game despite the fact that brand marketing is truly what wins in the market. So brand marketers, it's time to think differently and embrace what we call performance branding. Discover and measure brand metrics that really matter. Focus on things like creative. Focus on things like on-target reach. Think about share of voice, etc. So think more about being memorable and not just clickable.
So we are at the portion of the episode where we talk about questions and their answers. Jeff, that was great. That was really fun.
It was fun.
I know, right?
I agree wholeheartedly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's what I like.
I learned a lot about brand, really ownable brand marketing, performance branding.
Why don't we're going to go through a couple questions, because there's really some things that stood out that I think our audience needs to hear again or have as the key point.
Yeah. Something that you had mentioned, I'll try to recount it in the order that you presented it, but something that really stood out to me was when you were talking about like owning characters and what brands can own, what they can't own, and maybe it's not so black and white, but what they're more successful at owning. And I was thinking about characters in B2B, and to your point, there really aren't that many, but a lot of our clients will sort of say, okay, well, we don't want to be so attribute focused that we're only showing the product in our creative. We want to show people maybe using the product or people sort of associated with the product in some aspirational way. And well, we're going to put people in our advertising or in our creative. But what I was really hearing from you is like, yeah, that's not necessarily going to be enough. Like it might be enough to generate some warmth in creative, but in terms of ownability, it's just not necessarily the approach we should take.
Yeah, and it kind of all comes down to, how can I create distinctive brand assets that can resonate with my audience, right? And so that's why we talk about that concept of ownership, right? So how much ownership can my brand have over whatever the asset is that that I'm incorporating? And that's why I thought that the study was interesting to sort of see where things sat on the compendium. You asked me about taglines. Where does a tagline sit in terms of like how distinctive can it be? How much ownership can be related to the brand? I mean, ask someone like MasterCard how Priceless has done for them as a tagline. It's done pretty well, but not the easiest thing generally to own. So that's why it was interesting, sort of seeing something like characters, whether it's something animated, whether it's a celebrity, whether it's an employee. I love the employee angle. I think it's been used to great effect, and but it's got to be something that can be distinctive. And that's why incorporating people is great. Incorporating people in a unique way where the ownership can be distinctly related to your brand versus another is sort of the key piece there.
I have this theory. Sorry to cut you off because it's not a data-backed theory. My theory about taglines is that if you didn't create one in the 90s or the early 2000s, there's no point in creating one now because people don't have cable anymore, and it's not like you're not seeing the same ads all the time. I could be wrong, but that's just my theory. Like Priceless is perfect because when did MasterCard do Priceless? Or like Nike, like the ones that you remember. But if you think like, I don't know, does Amazon have a tagline? They might. Do they? I don't know. Even like, does LinkedIn have a tagline?
We don't necessarily have we've got a mission
Yeah,
and a vision,
of course,
but not necessarily a tagline.
And very important things to like rally your internal people around. But like externally, like in terms of ownability of a tagline, it's just, anyway.
And the research that was shared is that taglines, it's basically 30% harder to own a tagline than it is to own a character.
But
so, and when we talk to our audience, it's not about unlimited budgets. You have to decide where does my effective dollar go? And what we've concluded is that I think the big contrarian opportunity within B2B brands is characters. We need to have, I think, more discussions as marketers around characters because this is something that Salesforce has implemented successfully, and they sell to enterprise brands, and they're serious professionals selling. Like, so I can hear some of the, I think, questions we get back, bringing these conversations to our clients, and perhaps you listening, you're like, no, I don't think we could do that. Let's ask some more questions because I think there's some more things to be discovered.
Because in B2C, we saw 5% of brands or of campaigns have a character. B2B was 1%. So there's obviously a challenge in terms of great creative and brand assets in B2B space when it comes to characters even more.
Yeah. Speaking of questions,
you are quite the character, so I'm glad you're here. This is how. Yep, we're connecting.
I don't know if I, anyway, great. So, but speaking of audience questions, I think they'll have a lot around the 95-5 practice.
Yes.
And how lead gen sort of fits into all of that. And I was wondering about, you talked about reaching people before they're in market. You talked about not having a funnel, which I wonder if people panicked.
I panicked.
about that. Yeah, and actually, I was wondering if there's is it that sort of black and white, in market, out market, or is there some nuance there?
It's a great question. Does the marketing funnel, as all of us marketing professionals actually know it, does it actually exist? Have you ever moved, neatly through a marketing funnel before? Just say, have you moved, step by step through, consideration to,
Maybe buying a stick of gum, but
maybe
that, I think it's a little bit more complicated.
Otherwise, and that's why, debate, if you will, does a marketing funnel, is how applicable it is today. But, that's why we sort of arrived at, this idea of, in market, out market being, maybe something that's a little bit, easier for marketers to kind of work with, right? So if I understand that 95% of my, target buyers in my category aren't buying today. They might buy at some point in the future. It might be a month from now. It could be a year from now. It could be 5 years from now. But, if they don't know my brand when, they are ready to buy, then it probably is too late for me to actually kind of make that sale. So that's why you sort of think about things like, lead gen and brand. They both play a part. Maybe things are a little bit more skewed towards lead gen now because it's easier. It's got instant results. But brand and lead gen kind of work over different time horizons. Brand can kind of build on itself over time, month over month, year over year. It might take a year, 2 years, 3 years for a brand marketing campaign to have an effect on your target audience, but it can compound, it can build. Whereas lead gen doesn't necessarily have that. Lead gen's very, very short term, very small time horizon, and there's no real lasting effect to it. So when we think about the 95-5 rule, in market, out market, to appeal to that 95%, that's why brand is so key. You want to have that brand execution in there so you can build those memory structures with people who are in your category that might buy in the future, so you can appeal to them when they actually do enter the market.
And can we talk about budget?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think I have a lot of questions around budget, and I think a lot of questions come to us as an agency around budget because, do we put 95% of our budget into the 95? Do we put 5 into 5? How do we get that balance right?
Yeah.
And this is big because if we do this right, the compounding effects of being a market for brand is obviously, like you're saying, it grows over time.
Yeah.
We do this wrong, I sometimes get that pit in my stomach when we say, let's turn off that campaign, or the always on campaign, let's shut that off. We need to be in market building the brand. So how do you think about budget in that world?
So we did a survey at LinkedIn among our customers, and we're kind of living this every day too. And one of the things that we heard back from people was that when it comes to budget allocation, 90% is going to lead generation and a mere 10%, right. Going to brand. And so, yeah, it's a reality. It's happening. But we actually did some research in conjunction with the IPA in the UK. They have a database of 30 years worth of marketing effectiveness case studies where they actually broke down what is the optimal breakdown of spend between brand and lead gen, and what they found was that the optimal in B2C circles was 60% brand, 40% lead gen. We actually worked with them to actually do a B2B cut of that data. It was a bit more of a 50-50 proposition. So a little bit more lead gen in terms of B2B was necessary in terms of the optimal allocation that would lead to the most effectiveness in terms of your marketing. So it's a far cry from 90-10, but because brand, again, works over a different time horizon and can be more effective if you can commit to it, we really think that marketers should at least try to move more towards 60-40 in consumer circles. B2B 50-50 is fine too.
And I think if that is optimal, how much more important is it that the 50% on brand or the 60% on brand is being effective, doing the thing we need it to do, which is to hold attention and build that top of mind?
Yeah. And as you're speaking, I'm thinking of a whole bunch of B2B company, I imagine that this news, assuming it is news, is scary, because if it's not,
To bring a CFO in the room and have this conversation.
well, there aren't as clear of numbers, or certainly not as many numbers. I mean, other than, say impressions or something like that, in terms of measuring your campaign performance. Like, that's really scary. And then also trying to speak to customers, or sorry, not customers, audiences who aren't in market, and trying to connect. How do you connect with someone who's not even looking for you yet or ready for you yet? And I think that is a scary idea for B2B marketers who are really in the weeds with features and benefits and attribute marketing. It really calls on B2B companies to dig deeper into their brand and sort of their purpose, and like all of these really touchy-feely things potentially that brands aren't really used to doing, B2B brands at least.
Exactly. And that's where I love this idea of situational awareness and having, a better understanding of like, what are those buying situations that, your audience is actually considering you or will consider you in the future. And so, by going through and, you can use this framework that we talked about today, the W's framework. It's a simple way, to your point, to almost do like, journey mapping in terms of, what your customers are doing when, it's more about like, when are they buying you, and what are the situations around that? So if you as a brand can better understand what those buying situations are, and you can tailor your message towards that, and owning those buying situations, that's going to be huge. And then the more of those buying situations that you can own as a brand, that just allows you to grow even more if you can own more than one buying situation. That's the key.
What's kind of beautiful about this is it speaks right to humanology. We talk about this internally a lot, but it's the idea of how do we find a human insight that we can leverage and actually use it to drive performance, use it to get more effective as marketers. And it's not just about having performance ads driving lead gen to do the actions we want. It is about customer journey mapping. And there's easy ways to do this. We do a really research-driven, in-depth way at Jan Kelley. There's lightweight ways you can do it. But that's really important, or using the questions you have to get those human insights to drive what your campaigns are looking like. And that's how you drive business results over time. So that kind of really spoke to me when you're speaking about situational awareness. Yep. You discussed performance branding. And I think when our audience hears, oh, we need to do some brand marketing, that gets a bit scary, because it's like, how much budget do I need to do brand level marketing? A lot of smaller brands where they look at big corporate giants spending hundreds of millions of dollars in their category, it's like, how can I even participate? And so how would you think about kind of that performance level branding, brand marketing, budgets? How do we deal with that?
Well, sure, it could be daunting, right? So you hear the word brand marketing, you think, oh man, that sounds expensive. I need to advertise to the universe. Well, that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is having an understanding of what your category is, and trying to reach everybody within that category, so that when they are coming into market in the future, your brand will be the one that they think of. So, we think it's an opportunity for large brands, certainly, even, medium-sized and smaller brands can participate in brand marketing and be effective at it by having a good understanding of like, what is their category. So I'm not trying to reach everybody. I'm just trying to reach like, who are my potential future buyers, but then also have an understanding of like, what are those, category entry points? What are the buying situations that, my buyers are in, and be able to appeal to them. So that's where we can use targeting to zero in on, the right people in those right buying situations, and be able to create those memory structures with those folks, so that when they are coming into market, mine is the brand that they think of first.
And the truth is, LinkedIn is a highly trusted platform. There's great targeting. It's unique. It's an engaged audience. But you do have to do the work to understand, like, where is your category? Because for sure, they likely would be on LinkedIn, but there could be other places. And so if I'm sitting at home and I'm like, okay, I need to send my marketers to think about what we should do from a brand perspective. Do the strategy work, define the category, customer journey mapping, the questions, I think would bring up a lot of these moments. Then you're going to develop your creative around that. And now here's my question. So if I am a marketer and I want to be effective on LinkedIn, what is it that I need? Do I need the great creative, or do I need the best performance marketer I can find? Like who do I need? What's your opinion? Because we have to make choices, and is it great creative or is it great data-driven marketer?
It's actually both, right? So I don't want to, simplify the question overly, but I think one of the things that we see is that, great creative, especially in B2B circles, is at a deficit these days. So, we could see people leverage that in a much bigger way. We spent a lot of time this year at Cannes actually introducing a B2B category at Cannes this year to try and inspire marketers to try and look at the B2B category as being something where, yes, I can actually do great things in B2B. I can, do breakthrough creative and even, possibly win an award with it too, right? So it's a different time for B2B, and I think there's a huge opportunity in creativity and being able to take that creativity to the next level. But at the same time, when you take, down to earth in terms of like, how do I manage a campaign? How do I manage an effective program? It still takes that knowledge, the best practices, and the processes and activation skills to be able to do it. I know we work closely with you guys at Jan Kelley to make sure that you guys have all the best practices, know all the best ways to do it. So yes, it's both. You guys are a great partner in terms of being able to be folks who know our platform inside and out and how to get the most out of it. So if you can kind of marry the combination of great creative as well as managing an effective program, that's kind of a killer combination.
Well, thank you, Jeff. You've challenged me, elevated my thinking, I think with our audience too.
Yeah, it's been a real eye-opening day. Thank you.
That's great. And thanks for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. And, the human touch is something that I really appreciate too.
Where can people find you, Jeff?
You can find me on LinkedIn if anybody wants to connect. Jeff Lancaster here in Toronto on LinkedIn. So feel free to reach out. I'd love to connect.